within sound of my voice. And so all day today and throughout the night, the National Broadcasting Company will bring you the latest news bulletins as they come off the wire, plus frequent analyses of these bulletins by expert news commentators. These reports come to you as part of our special Invasion Day schedule. German broadcasts continue to tell of attacks along the beaches for 100 miles between the ports of Cherbourg and Le Havre, but they say that Hitler's mobile reserves are rushing to meet the attack. It must be admitted the Nazi-controlled NBC Radio says tonight that the Allied beachhead area has been considerably widened and that Allied reinforcements are pouring in. A Spanish dispatch says that across the Seine estuary from Le Havre, the Allies are fanning out from Honfleur toward 3 inland towns from 10 to 15 miles distant. And here's a report from New York. RAF pilots coming back from bombings along the French coast today have added to our military intelligence. The airmen saw Allied tanks moving up to Caen, that's C-A-E-N, but as they passed overhead, the British flyers saw no enemy infantry in that sector. The flyers also observed several fires which looked like gasoline dumps going off. This is a report from the London radio heard by our monitors here in New York. And I'll repeat the second communique, Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Force. Allied forces have succeeded in their initial landings in France, and fighting continues. This has just been announced by this second Allied communique. Naval casualties are regarded as very light. And in this second communique on the invasion, SHAEF says that the Allied assault forces met little opposition in the Channel or in the air. That means the Luftwaffe is still lying low. 50 German planes were the total shot down today, as listed in earlier reports. America's heavyweight bombers have been carrying out repeated attacks at more than 100 targets along the French coast just recently. The Luftwaffe is still holding back as it did in the earlier hours, still holding back as it did against us in Italy. We can still take a terrific pounding there on the coast of France. I'll repeat another late report from the enemy. Berlin radio says that about 15 Allied cruisers, 50 to 60 destroyers are off Le Havre, guarding great numbers of landing craft, apparently waiting orders to hit the coast. And these numbers of craft explain apparently our very low naval losses announced today by President Roosevelt. 1 warship, 1 landing craft. Naval air losses less than 1%, the president said. German dispatches again say Adolf Hitler has assumed personal command of the Nazi forces resisting the invasion. Under Hitler there at the front are Field Marshals von Rundstedt and Rommel. These are the 2 anti-invasion generals reported to be right on the spot. And I'll continue now with the official text of communique number 2. Here's the official text of Allied Supreme Headquarters communique number 2. Shortly before midnight, June 5th, 1944, Allied night bombers opened the assault. They attacked in very great strength and continued until dawn. Between 6:30 and 7:30 a.m. this morning, 2 naval task forces commanded by Rear Admiral I.R. Philip Vian, flying his flag in HMS Scylla, and Rear Admiral Alan Goodrich Kirk, United States Navy, in the Augusta, launched their assault forces at enemy beaches. This is Don Hollenbeck in the NBC newsroom in New York, and that's all for now.
And now we continue our invasion program with Serenade to America.
Send you a serenade. Milton Katims will conduct the orchestra and chorus. Winifred Height will be the soloist. And Nora Sterling will speak to you.
This is Nora Sterling. Today we're putting aside our usual Serenade to America program. Along with everybody else in America, our minds and hearts are full of only one thing: the tremendous news that came to us only a few hours ago. We're glad, of course, that the waiting is over, the action has started, and that, please God, the end is in sight. But we can't help thinking of all that has still to be gone through before that end is reached. Today is no time for wild rejoicing. I think today is a time for dedication and for very humble prayer. The deep and almost nameless emotions we all must be feeling now, we went instinctively back to the man who left us so much glorious church music. Though he lived 200 years ago, Johann Sebastian Bach has never been surpassed for inspiring and reverential music. They say there are no atheists in Foxhole. However many there may be along Main Street or Wall Street, the nearer to the battlefront, the less that's remembered. And however high stands this book or that book on the bestseller list, there's one to which everybody returns at such a time as this. It holds up a light in the face of every problem, doubt, dismay, even in the face of death. The psalmist said, God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore will not we fear, though the earth be removed, and though the mountains be carried into the midst of the sea. There is a river, the streams whereof shall make glad the city of God. God is in the midst of her. She shall not be moved. God shall help her, and that right early. The heathen raged, the mountains were moved. He uttered his voice, the earth melted. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. Come, behold the works of the Lord. He maketh wars to cease unto the end of the earth. He breaketh the bow and cutteth the spear in sunder. Be still, and know that I am God. Just as there is one book to which we all return, so there's one prayer that covers all our needs. Here is Winifred Height to sing it for you.
Ah!
Now, here's the orchestra to play the Adagio Pathétique by the much-loved French composer, Godard. Winifred Height will sing now the restful and lovely Ave Maria by Bach-Gounod. The book of Isaiah is full of the most inspiring and majestic poetry. Thousands of years ago, this Old Testament prophet spoke lines that seem to have been written for this very time, this very day, when the forces of liberation are going out to meet the oppressors. Thus saith the Lord to his anointed, Fear ye not, neither be afraid. Have not I told thee from that time, and have declared it? Ye are even my witnesses. I, the Lord, have called thee in righteousness, and will hold thine hand, and will keep thee, and give thee for a covenant of the people, to open the blind eyes, to bring out the prisoners from the prison, and them that sit in darkness out of the prison house. I will go before thee, and make the crooked places straight. I will break in pieces the gates of brass, and cut asunder the bands of iron. For I am the Lord, and there is none else. My glory will I not give to another. If I may, I'd like to voice out loud what I think must be in everyone's heart just now in some form or another. Dear God, today we pray for these few things most urgently. We ask protection for the men and women who are doing this job overseas, guidance for them. We ask that in each of them there may be some light of faith to give them courage when they need it most. And we ask that the eventual victory may come as quickly as possible, at as little cost as possible. For ourselves here at home, for whom they're fighting, I think we need to ask most simply that we be with it, that we match their courage with ours, their singleness of purpose. And please help us all everywhere to remember that when the victories come, even that is only a means toward an end, towards an enduring and universal peace, a peace not of apathy or fear, but of understanding and justice and mutual goodwill. Amen.
This is the National Broadcasting Company.
Good evening, everybody. Tonight's communique just in from Invasion Headquarters summarizes the news of all the successful landings. Allied forces, it says, have succeeded in their initial landings in France, and fighting continues. The communique goes on with air action, saying that all day Allied planes continued their bombing in what the dispatch calls very great strength. Another bulletin states that a German counterattack is in the making. It says the first German counterattack is likely to materialize within the next 48 hours. And another bulletin just in emphasizes the element of surprise, saying that the Nazis were caught off their guard in an effective surprise by the Allied forces. Well, the news pictures Allied troops battling in the streets of the Norman city of Caen. That place is 9.5 miles inland, which represents a drive of that far from the beachheads established early this morning. The Germans tell us that the landing forces are broadening and strengthening their positions and getting incessant reinforcements. New masses of troops, new tons of armament pouring ashore. Caen is at the base of the Norman Peninsula, which thrusts northward into the English Channel, and the drive to the town makes it look as if the strategy were to cut across the base of that peninsula and force a Nazi withdrawal from the whole area. The possession of that peninsula would mean a powerful base from which Allied thrusts could be driven inland, probably in the direction of Paris. To the British troops in the Second Front forces, that town of Caen represents historic memories. That is, if they have time to think about it. For it was there in the river that William the Conqueror in 1066 assembled his fleet with which he invaded Britain, the Norman conquest, and the mortal remains of the conqueror lie interned in the church of Saint-Etienne in the city of Caen. The latest advices from both sides, allied and enemy, picture the invasion as concentrated at 3 points: the mouth of the Orne River, where Caen lies, and 40 miles westward along the coast, the mouth of the Vire River. That point, too, threatens the base of the peninsula, and the Germans report that the Allied troops have cut an important highway still further along. Nazi accounts tell us that there have been landings also in the area between Boulogne and Calais, the Dover Straits, across the narrowest width of water from Britain. The German radio is quoted as saying that Allied airborne troops have seized a flying field in that sector, although there is no Allied confirmation of this so far. It so happens that the coastal battlefield is one of the most familiar stretches of ground on this earth. The French Channel shore from Cherbourg to Le Havre, for many years one of the commonest routes of travel for American tourists visiting Europe. They often landed at Cherbourg, and then the railroad to Paris took them along the coastal lands. I myself have made that railroad trip many a time and have seen the coast from the waterside. Flat country, only slight rises of ground from the beaches. Cherbourg itself on a tall, rugged headland, a strongly fortified harbor just below. And around Calais and Dieppe, there are cliffs, like those white cliffs of Dover right across the channel. But in between the Calais-Dieppe area and Cherbourg, the beaches are broad and flat, and the level ground extends on inward, a water-level route to Paris. And so, any of the thousands of travelers who have made the railroad trip will appreciate the statement in the invasion news coming in that the most favorable stretch of coast was selected for the second front landings today. The events of today were studded with records, too. The greatest fleet of ships ever to set sail. 4,000 ships and thousands of lesser craft. The greatest army ever to strike at a hostile shore. That vast force of men and machines, tens of thousands of men increasing to hundreds of thousands, millions before it is over. And the greatest air assault ever delivered. Before the day began, in the hours of darkness between midnight and dawn, thousands of British planes hurled more than 5,000 tons of bombs on the Nazi fortifications. Then more than 1,000 American heavy bombers took up the assault, and soon the total tonnage of bombs was more than 11,000. A British air officer remarks that the total tonnage of bombs dropped in this one day of invasion was greater than the amount that the Germans hurled on Britain during the entire 6 months of the Great Blitz. The most colorful news of the day concerns the paratroopers, those airborne forces which struck behind the Nazi Atlantic walls in advance of the landing of the seaborne soldiers. A United Press correspondent who witnessed invasion scenes from the coast of England describes the sky as looking like what he calls a Christmas tree with colored lights strung out in long lines. These, he goes on, were the running lights of the planes carrying airborne troops. The lights were to identify them to anti-aircraft batteries in Britain. Wave after wave of these airborne fleets, he relates, passed over the coast in a steady stream, their colored lights beaming and finally vanishing as they disappeared over the channel in the direction of France. In that first wave of paratroopers was an outfit which reminds you of American history of times gone by. Indians, yes, Indians, wearing their tribal scalp locks. They restrained their tribal war whoop, however, while descending silently, parachuting to earth. Then all of their ancestral stealth was needed when they got down, as they spread out over the country today. Their job needed the stealth of the braves of times gone by. For these Indians landing in France today were Yaqui and Cherokee tribesmen. They were demolition engineers whose task it was to sneak in and blow up enemy installations. One of the paratroopers to jump today was Robert Hillman of Hartford, Connecticut, who felt an especial sense of security. This story, by the way, is wired me by an old friend, Ted Shane of the Black Watch, author of a book called Heroes of the Pacific. Shane tells how recently Private Hillman said to a colonel at inspection, "I know my chute is okay because my mother checked it. She works in the Pioneer Parachute Company in our town, and her job is giving the final ones over to all the chutes." Prime Minister Winston Churchill's formal report on D-Day was given in tones of measured optimism in two statements to the House of Commons, the second of which recited the progress of events up to mid-afternoon. Sober and factual tones made his disclosures all the more encouraging. "This operation," said Winston Churchill to the Commons, "is proceeding in a highly satisfactory manner." And then he went on, "Many dangers and difficulties which last night seemed to be extremely formidable are behind us. Passage of the sea," he exclaimed, "has been made with far less loss than we apprehended." And he went on to say that the bristling batteries of Nazi guns across the Channel had been greatly weakened by air bombing and the fire of naval artillery. And Churchill emphasized in these words, "Landings and follow-ups are proceeding with very much less loss than we expected." However, Churchill went on with his usual note of realistic caution. "All this," he said, "although a very favorable and vitally essential first step, cannot indicate what may be the course of battle in the next few weeks, because the enemy will endeavor to concentrate in this area. And in that event, heavy fighting," said Churchill, "will soon begin and will continue without any end so long as the enemy can push troops in. This is, however," he concluded, "the most serious time, and we enter upon it with our great allies, all in good heart and good friendship." President Roosevelt this afternoon added his own warning against overconfidence. He pointed out that it is one thing to land successfully on enemy beaches and another to drive the long, hard miles to the heart of the enemy country. The President said that the decision to launch today's blow was made last December at the Churchill-Stalin-Roosevelt Conference in Tehran. It was then decided that the Second Front would get underway toward the end of May or the first days of June. No exact date could be fixed because that depended on accidents of weather. But President added that he himself had known the exact date, Tuesday, June 6, 1944, only during these past few days. So he knew it last night when he was on the radio. The President says that while he was on the air making his broadcast concerning the fall of Rome, he was aware that the invasion boats already were on their way across the English Channel. One of the tense turns of drama was enacted today in a motor trailer under a tent somewhere along the southern coast of England. The trailer, headquarters of General Ike Eisenhower. From this, he will direct the onslaught until the Allied command crosses the Channel and sets up headquarters on French soil. So early this morning, there was the ruddy-faced and ordinarily smiling Eisenhower. But he was tense now, in a moment of his great decision. It was for him to give the order for the hurling of the second front. Was this the time? Should he set the whole vast offensive into operation? That was a question of weather. It had been noticed that during the past 48 hours, the usual Eisenhower posture had been head cocked up, looking at the sky. D-Day had been scheduled for yesterday, but no, it did not take one of those Eisenhower looks at the sky to see that the weather was bad, stormy, bad for flying, impossible for paratroop operations, channel too rough for the efficient handling of boats. The general's glances upward were a quest for signs of clearing, harbingers of better weather. So what were the prospects for today? Eisenhower and the top-ranking commanders studied the weather reports, the weatherman being the real commander-in-chief for the declaration of D-Day. The meteorological reports turned out to be good enough, but the weather today was by no means perfect. Not too good for bombing fleets of the sky, though these did a huge and devastating task. The channel was quieter than yesterday, though still choppy. That turbulent strait, whose seasickness-producing antics are a legend. For the airborne assault, the question of weather was the most critical of all. Things have got to be just right for dropping paratroopers in the dim break between darkness and dawn. Well, all of these chances were a weighty burden on the mind of the commanding general who had to decide, go ahead or delay again. Eisenhower has ample heart and courage for making a decision, and he gave the fateful order, D-Day. Surely he had enough to occupy the mind of any one man, enough to monopolize every thought in his head. And yet I wonder whether his fancy did not stray, at least for a brief moment, to this side of the ocean. I wonder, did he stop and think for a moment of that tall bluff on the broad river, with the height crowned by stately buildings? Did he think of West Point and his wife and his son? For it's a moody coincidence that this invasion day, which Eisenhower marked down in history, was also graduation day at West Point, and his son John was one of the graduating class. His mother was there to see him get his diploma, while his father was over there, commanding on D-Day. In Soviet Russia, the invasion news was announced with all the military fanfare that attends the proclamation of a great Red Army victory. And today's Moscow Dispatch tells us that the Russian people exploded with an outburst of joy greater than they usually accord their own triumphs. Everywhere in Moscow, the hope was expressed that the war would end quickly now, and the Red Army seems about to do its own large bit toward that happy consummation. The word is tonight that the Russians will launch another big offensive of their own within 24 or 48 hours, almost certainly before the end of this week. The second front to be supported by a new big push on the first front. As for the war news from Italy, of course it's eclipsed by the much greater events along the English Channel. We may note, however, that yesterday's action still continues, the Fifth Army driving rapidly forward, with the Germans in full retreat. For a brief while, the battlefront was along the historic river Tiber, from Rome to the sea. But with only the briefest pause, British and American troops were across the Tiber, which for all its venerable reputation is no great stream, according to American standards. From the river, the advance pushed on along a 17-mile front, and so much for Italy. Well, the nation here at home today took the D-Day news with a feeling of earnestness and hope. Everywhere people were soberly repeating the exclamation of a sergeant as his boat pushed off in that dim light this morning. They can't stop us, so said the sergeant. Many an amusement feature was shut down today because of the feeling that it wasn't appropriate to the news that was flashing in. Typical was a Marine Corps sergeant at Hollywood in the early hours of the morning. He had just won a jitterbugging contest in a nightclub, and he was beaming. And then he heard the news, and he said sheepishly, "I feel sort of silly." One of the oddities is the fact that at Reno, that wide-open Nevada town, the gambling houses closed down today. Across the land, there were demonstrations of patriotism. At Philadelphia, the Liberty Bell rang, that symbol of American freedom. And in numberless churches, the bells pealed out, calling people to prayer. Over in England, the appeal to divine providence was led by the king, whose prayer concluded with the solemn cadence, "We shall not ask that God may do our will," said the king, "but that we may be enabled to do the will of God." And in this country, the President leads the nation in prayer tonight in the countrywide broadcast. Meanwhile, let's switch to Washington now to hear a voice that can speak an appeal with singular appropriateness. Chaplain Brigadier General William R. Arnold, Chief of the Chaplains of the United States Army.
Almighty and eternal God, and we, thy humble servants, are on our knees this fateful day to adore thee and to implore thy help. Thou who knowest the weakness and the frailty of our nature, hast shown us through the sufferings and sacrifice of thy beloved Son how to be brave and strong and victorious. As our fathers, sons, and brothers on distant battlefields fight valiantly for our liberties and for thy truth and justice, graciously shed the light of thy countenance upon them and sustain them by the power of thine unconquerable will. Send angels of thy heavenly host to lead them on to a glorious victory for thy honor and glory. Amen.
And on that solemn note, we conclude one of the greatest days in the history of man, a day meant to mark the turning point of the global war. In years to come, the world and its history will tell again and again of this day, June 6th, D-Day, Invasion Day. And so long until tomorrow.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. This is the National Broadcasting Company. WEAF, New York.
Ladies and gentlemen, again NBC interrupts its schedule for a brief pause, inviting its listeners to devote a very special prayer to our fighting forces. Dr. Ralph W. Sockman, pastor of Christ Church in New York and officiating minister on NBC's national radio pulpit, will lead us in offering this meditation. Dr. Sockman.
Our Father, in whose will is our peace and in whose love is our hope, we turn to thee in trust and confidence. Bridge with our prayers these oceans which separate us from our loved ones, that they may feel us beside them in spirit. Fly with those who flash through the darkened sky. Journey with those who sail the seas. Protect them in body and in spirit. Give strength, O God, to those who struggle, wisdom to those who lead, skill to those who heal, and comfort to those who mourn, and grant us all courage for whatever may come, and patience to wait and work for thy will to achieve its victory through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Thank you, Dr. Sockman.
Good evening. This is Robert St. John speaking from the NBC newsroom in New York and bringing you the news of the world. Tonight, our News of the World program has been expanded to a full half hour without commercial announcements. A little later, we will bring you our own reporters speaking directly from 4 United Nations capitals, London, Moscow, Washington, and liberated Rome. But first, here is a quick 5-minute roundup of the invasion situation up to 7 p.m. Eastern War Time. On the beachheads of France, the first full day of battle is now over. And how has that battle gone? Well, we have the word of the men who are running the operation thus far that things have gone better than they had expected. Let me quote them briefly. Supreme Headquarters says, initial landings succeed, fighting proceeds. Winston Churchill says that the enemy was surprised by our landings. The airborne troops are well established behind Nazi lines. The Allied forces have penetrated several miles inland. Losses have been far lighter than had been anticipated, and the operation is proceeding in a thoroughly satisfactory manner. President Roosevelt says the invasion of Europe is up to schedule. Air losses were light, only about 1%. Naval losses to mid-afternoon were only 2 destroyers and 1 escort vessel. Secretary of War Stimson, the invasion is going very nicely. General Monty Montgomery, the actual combat commander, says that he is pleased with the initial phase of the operation. Admiral King, Commander-in-Chief of the Fleet, puts it this way. The invasion is doing all right so far. The most encouraging word of all is that casualties, Allied casualties, have not been nearly as great as had been expected. Of course, our men still have to face the first counterattack of the enemy. The Nazis have fallen back. They're waiting to see whether this is the real thing or whether this is just one of many strikes at Europe. And the Luftwaffe is also waiting. Once Hermann Goering declared, invasion must be beaten off even if the Luftwaffe perishes. But today the Luftwaffe remains in hiding. One report says only 50 German planes were encountered. Our side put 11,000 fighters and bombers into the air. Perhaps Hitler and his field marshals are worried about additional surprises, which Winston Churchill told the world today the Nazis could expect. Hitler now has 2 active fronts, something he never wanted. One front in Italy, another front in France. And there are indications tonight, if you read between the lines, that a 3rd front is about to burst into violence. I wouldn't be surprised if, before the night is over, the Russian army opened its great offensive. Large-scale air battles are taking place right now between Red Army planes and the Luftwaffe over Romania. And we've just had a bulletin that U.S. bombers based in Russia have joined in attacking German targets in Romania. Churchill has hinted there may be a 4th and a 5th front, that the Allies may make landings in other parts of the coast. But the objective of today's big operation is the seizure of the entire Normandy Peninsula, that finger of land which sticks out into the Channel and comes just 90 miles from touching Britain. That is our first objective, but the real goal is Paris. Paris, which lies much less than 200 miles from where Allied soldiers are tonight dug in. And now we take you to the Invasion Center, to NBC in London. London apparently isn't ready for us yet, so let me go on just a little bit longer. Here are a few odd little sidelights on the main story, which I've been collecting for you today. The invasion was postponed 24 hours because of weather. As the first Americans went ashore, the low-lying clouds were painted with dabs of purple. Hundreds of the doughboys were inspired as they rowed across the Channel by the sight of a resplendent rainbow which streaked the sky over France, with the pot of gold, the end of the rainbow, on the horizon in the direction of Paris. London tells us that the Allied Army of Liberation carried many a secret weapon into battle. Adolf Hitler right now is reported to be rushing across Europe toward the actual battlefront. And now to London.
Come in, London.
From the air today has been the almost universal expression of surprise at the relative feebleness of German resistance. There have been casualties, of course. Inevitably, in such an enterprise, ships are sunk, planes go whirling down in flames. Men are wounded and men die. But has been the occasional curious and pleasant experience in the Pacific in the war against the Japs. At almost every point when our great mailed fist is struck today, the Germans' European fortress has been relatively ill-protected. One must repeat that word, relatively. A feeble striking force would have found the Nazis strong at every beach. Our enormous force, however, clearly has not yet encountered either the quantity, the quality, or the rigidity of the resistance it expected. The first vessels to move against the French coast were the minesweepers. The moon, of course, is full. At no hour of the night was visibility poor. Yet those vessels and the tensely, largely British crews who manned them moved ahead upon their dangerous errand almost unchallenged. They advanced across the luminous and choppy sea until their bottoms nearly scraped upon the foreshore of the European continent. The landing craft went through the paths that had been made for them with astonishingly light losses. That fact, of such primary importance, a source of such tremendous relief, was confirmed late today from a top official source by NBC's own staff correspondent, Merrill Muller, who was attached during the opening phase of the invasion to Supreme Allied Headquarters, somewhere in England. Muller reported that the Naval Command actually responsible for delivering the American, British, and Canadian armies at high tide mark had made the comparatively optimistic estimate that at least 10% of the landing craft would be lost in the first wave. Actual losses were far below that figure. The steel and concrete snags that were presumed to have been erected in great numbers just below the sea's surface on all the possible approaches to Europe were conspicuous by their, again, relative scarcity. What we know least about so far is the actual progress of the fight ashore. But there, too, the impression is the German response has been not less bitter, but apparently less powerful than many had imagined that it would be. There is no question whatever that enemy air action has been just plain feeble. One would certainly think that if the enemy still has a Luftwaffe, he would use it now. But, and I stress, thus far, he has not done so. Air resistance over nearby Europe has been negligible. An air officer has just assured me that impatient Allied fighter pilots have gone hunting for Nazi planes to shoot down and have come home sorely disappointed. As with everyone else within range, I so deeply appreciated during the opening offensives in Italy. Nazi artillery today in France has been unimpressive. And by no means least of all, the people of London and southeast England, the long-threatened German super rocket gun that were allegedly capable of tossing giant explosive loads all the way to Piccadilly have not yet gone into action, though tapping wood is still in order. There are several explanations. One, the easiest and the pleasantest, is that our superlative weapon of air power has kept the promise of the enthusiasts, and down through the months and years has induced a fatal weakness in the Reich. Unquestionably, that is part of the explanation. Ed Hawker of NBC, who flew this morning through a sky peppered with German anti-aircraft fire over the Cherbourg Peninsula, brought back the estimate that as perhaps as many as 7,000 Allied planes were in the air today against the enemy. Today, specifically, most of their crashing attention was given to the comparatively narrow battle area. When such firepower as that is directed at hostile forces and positions, artillery emplacements are mangled and buried in thrown earth. Carefully placed big guns are twisted from their strong foundations. Enemy traffic is disrupted and turned back. Men cringe and quail and quit and die. The latest communiqué issued here just a little over an hour ago heavily underlined that interpretation of events. A high Allied officer also notes that never before in history have so many actual combat infantrymen been carried by plane with such success direct into a field of action. It would, though, probably be just as well to remember that that may not be the whole explanation. It is far too soon, certainly, to throw one's hat in the air. Lift it by all means. Lift it to gallant men and skilled commanders. But for a long time, the Nazis have conceded that it would be possible, if enough force were used, for us to make good on initial landings on the European coast. Since Field Marshal von Rundstedt, the Nazi invasion coast supreme commander, could not guess precisely where we were going to land, the German defense plan has always been to keep large, flexible reserves at points in the interior. The real test of arms, therefore, will come when the Nazi generals, and one can hope that the rumor is true that Adolf Hitler himself is in the West fumbling the battle with his own peculiar incompetence, when the Nazi generals make up their minds where our main attack is being launched, and then launch their own massive counterattack, which will be designed to drive us back into the sea. That, remember, was what they tried to do at Anzio, and that was what they so signally failed to do in a vastly better natural position against an infinitely weaker Allied force. We have learned much from that earlier experience. We have learned much in the time that has passed since then. We have grown stronger, while inevitably under the rain of bombs and fire that have been spread by day and night like a cosmic plague across the German land, and under the wounding assaults from south and east, the enemy must surely have grown weaker. It is announced here today that the Allies have used many new secret weapons. There has been no news from any source of the revelation of any Nazi secret tricks, as yet. Since the supreme headquarters of the Allied force, locally called SHAEF, is still reserved in its claims, the chief reliance thus far has been upon individual observers. The National Broadcasting Company has distinguished representation among them. David Anderson, who flew over France today with a unit of the Tactical Air Force, is the authority for the belief that the Germans were, as they say, tactically surprised. His was the first report of the astounding repainting job done just before HR, when all the troop carriers bound south and east were boldly repainted in wide black and white stripes so as to avoid any possible confusion and to prevent any losses from our own guns. That, by the way, is almost arrogant proof of our air position, for all thought of plain camouflage has been utterly discarded. Wright Bryan of the NBC staff spent the first hour of the invasion flying at only a few hundred feet over the soil of France, watching our faultlessly trained American paratroopers go spinning out of the great transports under their blossoming mushroom sails in perfect formation to land in the pre-dawn dusk below. And now, if you'll forgive me for just a moment, I seem to have a page of my script missing. You can understand that this is a thoroughly addled situation here for the moment. In the dusk below, to undertake the brave task of giving instant battle to the enemy's rear, Stanley Richardson, NBC's London bureau chief, was assigned to the naval forces and broadcast long before most Americans were out of bed the superb good tidings that all beachheads had been made on schedule. That, by no means small matter, the landings were made in the right places, and that ship losses were astonishingly light. William Chaplin and I, in the general scurry, have during these long, sleepless and foodless hours, for the time being, inherited the colorless, though supposedly necessary task of inuring ourselves in an immensely crowded London basement, close to the microphones, and close to the close-mouthed purveyors of the Allied dispatches and the Allied news. And I can assure you we are both growing restless and rebellious. A late report from the Channel front does concede that as the sun declined, a few German fighters did appear southeast of the Cherbourg Peninsula battle area. But our men have been looking for the chance. There is so far no reason to think that belated Nazi effort in the air was crowned with any great success, or that it in any material way has affected the tide of the hard fighting that is at this very instant going on not much more than 100 miles from here. The setting of the sun has brought another cancellation, or at least postponement, of another threat that had long been looked for. With fingers crossed, I take pleasure in announcing that up to this late hour there has been no air alert in London. With the approach of darkness, the Channel seems to have done the expected and roughened. There may therefore be a heavier call for our oft-reported new secret weapon, the magic cure we suppose to have against seasickness. There is, however, no reason to suspect that nature, thus far so singularly friendly to us on all fronts, is giving any important aid or comfort to the enemy. The late-night communique, remember, it's after 1 o'clock in the morning, London time, for the first time gives the exact hour when the actual invasion began. Allied night bombers opened the assault at a few minutes before midnight, just a little more than 13 hours ago. A 13 that has, at this speaking, been markedly unlucky for the German enemy. Gliders, now deemed to be well past their experimental stage as actual vehicles of combat, have had heavy employment. As you know, of course, the lesson learned at Kwajalein Atoll has been put to use here in a colder and more narrow sea. The huge guns of battleships and lighter but hardly less deadly warships of other categories prepared the way ahead by heavy shelling of the landing area. I return you now, this is John W. Vandercook in London. I return you now to Robert St. John in New York.
This is Robert St. John in the NBC newsroom. Before I give you a few bulletins, let me read you an announcement. At 7:30 p.m. Eastern War Time, over most of these stations, you will hear an NBC exclusive program of historic importance, a poem and prayer for an invading army, written especially for D-Day by Edna St. Vincent Millay and starring the distinguished actor, Mr. Ronald Colman. And now here are some bulletins which have just come in while you have been listening to John W. Vandercook. London hears from Stockholm that Adolf Hitler is expected to make a speech very soon from somewhere in the West as personal commander of anti-invasion operations. And here's another bulletin from London which says that Berlin Radio tonight declares that about 15 Allied cruisers and 50 or 60 Allied destroyers are standing by in the English Channel just off Le Havre, apparently awaiting orders to hit the coast. And the German DNB news agency reports tonight that Marshal Karl von Rundstedt and Marshal Erwin Rommel, the Nazi commanders in Western Europe, are now on the spot of developments. I suppose that means they're at the front. We have a story from London tonight about Nazi propaganda. Here is what the Nazi line has been today. Today, Nazi propaganda harped on the theme that the Germans are glad the final test has come in the West, and that they're confident of the outcome. Nazi radio commentators and Dr. Paul Goebbels himself acknowledged that this attack is no mere sham and that the real test in France has finally come. The German propaganda minister spoke at a National Socialist Party meeting in a town which was very recently very heavily raided by Allied flyers. And he blustered this way. The enemy believes the situation in Germany to be the same as in 1918, but the enemy is mistaken. The ears of the Germans are shut against enemy propaganda and enemy slogans. The nerve campaign recently launched by the enemy in connection with the question of the invasion likewise failed to impress the German people. We are ready to receive the enemy. A speaker for Transocean News, a Nazi propaganda agency, reported that life remains quite normal in Berlin and that there's no excitement, no extra editions of the newspapers, no special radio announcements. Well, if you were up during the night and listened to us between 12:30 and 3:30 a.m. today, you know how untrue that is. You know about all the special bulletins which we put on the air from here, from Berlin, bulletins about the invasion. Dr. Goebbels unleashed today a long-prepared assortment of anti-invasion propaganda on the French. Its theme was, "Don't help the Allies. You will be sorry when your country is handed over to the Bolsheviks by the Allies." For German consumption, Goebbels said the German nation is listening to one single command, and this is the great Führer's command. Under his command, we have overcome even the most serious crisis. And now we take you to Honolulu.
This is Robert McCormick in Honolulu. Well, for the first time since I've been in the Central Pacific, Honolulu today has forgotten about the Japanese War. The preoccupation with the Pacific fighting has been so intense out here that I never supposed anything could distract the good people of the Hawaiian Islands. But the invasion of France has done the trick. Last night, the lights of Honolulu blazed away until dawn as Honolulu listened to NBC's magnificent coverage of the European invasion. The city was more brilliantly lighted than at any time since Pearl Harbor. Defense workers who have to get up at 5 in the morning to get to their jobs by 7 didn't even bother to go to bed. Yet those I saw going to work this morning seemed too excited to be tired. The pushing and shoving in the buses was no less vigorous than it is on a normal day. Then we have a message from Lieutenant General Richardson here to the Supreme Allied Command of the European Theater of Operations. General Richardson said, "Every soldier in the Central Pacific area is watching with pride and admiration the magnificent achievements of the forces under your command. We send you our prayers and our best wishes for every continuing success." The excitement here is understandable. We've a distinct feeling here that the success of the invasion will determine to a large extent the length and costliness of the Pacific War. The invasion of Europe is the last phase of the European War. That much seems obvious. We've moved rapidly in the Pacific since the first of the year, much more rapidly than we thought possible even 1 year ago. But it's highly unlikely that we're yet ready for our final big push. Our invasion of the Japanese mainland seems a long way off right at this point. But the speed with which our troops clean up the Germans may speed up the critical day out here. One thing is certain, however, the war here won't wait. As I've said before, we probably will have invasions of our own out in the Pacific, even before a decision is reached in Europe. They may be invasions on almost as big a scale as the mammoth affair going on now in Europe. So long as the Central Pacific War is a naval war, it can go right ahead. It can take us up to the coast of China, right up to the threshold of the Japanese mainland. And if that war in Europe ends quickly, it means, for one thing, that while England is already helping us beat the Japs, when the Germans are cleaned up, we'll find out whether we'll also get help over here from our other great ally, the Soviet Union. This is Robert McCormick in Honolulu, switching you to NBC in Washington.
This is Morgan Beatty in our nation's capital. Now it can be told. The approximate date for the second front, the front that Joseph Stalin had wanted, was set in Tehran last December. President Roosevelt told us newsmen today as much of the story behind the story of invasion as he could. The second front was to come in late May or early June, in the very first days of June at the latest. The weather played the most important role in setting D-Day. The English Channel, you know, is rough, too rough for landing craft until late in May. Mr. Roosevelt said the design of invasion satisfied Marshal Stalin completely. Reporters began tossing this point back at the chief executive there in his crowded White House office this afternoon, trying, as we reporters always will, to get all the answers you people want on the receiving end of the news. Mr. Roosevelt good-naturedly said our questions were becoming improper, and we knew it, but he was all smiles and no hard feelings. What pleased him most was the fact that the Allies had gained bridgeheads with the loss of only 2 destroyers and 1 landing ship tank. Our air losses were less than 1%, and he didn't say what the beachhead losses were. The losses among the combat teams, that is, that first set foot on enemy shores. But clearly, those losses were not nearly as great as the High Command had expected or counted on. Mr. Roosevelt sat up most of last night, you know, and so he was tired today, at least sleepy. But he's sticking on to 10 o'clock tonight, Eastern Wartime, to lead the nation in prayer. The prayer he's been writing for several days. The text was released in advance so that you may join him in the service if you wish. The prayer is highlighted by a request for divine aid in the struggle to preserve our republic, our religion, and our civilization, and to set free a suffering humanity. The President told us in that Oval Office on the ground floor of the White House today that our great danger now is overconfidence. Overconfidence can, in his opinion, impede the war effort and impede war production. The war is not over, he said. This operation isn't over. Incidentally, Admiral Ernest King of the Navy had expressed the same thought earlier today at the White House in another interview, when he said that invasion was going all right so far. The Germans, obviously, as you've been given word already, are not ready to commit their service or their reserves of either air power or manpower as yet. They sacrificed bridgeheads to us to gain knowledge of our plans as they unfold. But neither is there any cause for lack of confidence in events to date. Confidence fairly radiated from every point in Washington where D-Day was planned and in part executed. But now, for a turn around the Washington scene, here is Richard Harkness to give you the feel of the Capitol on D-Day.
Well, the President's attitude of calm, almost serene confidence is characteristic of the rest of Washington this D-Day evening. Secretary of War Henry Stimson, for instance, took time out only long enough to tell us newsmen that the invasion is going nicely, and then he went back to work. Well, General George C. Marshall, the Chief of Staff of our invading army, did not show up at his office in the Pentagon building until 7:30 o'clock this morning. General Marshall explained reasonably that he had done his work before the invasion. Well, Mrs. Roosevelt confessed that she, too, had known the invasion date in advance, and she says this is a day which has been hanging like a sword over our heads, but in itself it isn't very important. Well, the diplomatic representatives here from our United Nations share our leaders' confidence of success. Lord Halifax, the tall, gaunt ambassador from Great Britain, says we all have complete confidence in General Eisenhower, in his deputy commanders, and complete confidence in our Allied troops. The Russian ambassador, short, stocky Andrei Gromyko, adds this: what Hitler and his criminal clique have dreaded most has happened. Germany is now forced to carry on the war on 2 fronts. Well, Congress went about its business almost as usual this D-Day. The Senate and House began their sessions with a moment of silent prayer. The House Committee heard Sewell Avery, the chairman of Montgomery Ward, attack the National Labor Relations Board and the War Labor Board for seizing his plant in Chicago. Then the House, harking back to Pearl Harbor, wants Admiral Kimmel and General Short brought up for court-martial within the next 3 months. Now, there are some officials here this invasion day still worried about the strike outlook. This D-Day finds some 14,000 workers still idle. The most important strike, perhaps, is the walkout in the Wright Aeronautical Plant at Lockland, Ohio. Well, that is the picture of Washington on this June 6th D-Day. Our war leaders calm and confident. The people in the Capitol unexcited. The Capitol spirit best described by President Roosevelt's decision to lead the nation in prayer by radio at 10 o'clock this evening. I return you now to Robert St. John in the NBC newsroom in New York.
The wildest invasion celebrations in all the world today were probably those which took part in far-off China, removed by so many thousands of miles from the scene of the operations. The Chinese celebrated so enthusiastically because they figured that this means that the war in Europe will soon be over, and then British-American forces can turn to the east and help finish off the Japanese. The people in Tokyo got news of the invasion from their own radio, but only the Berlin version of what was happening. In Russia, there were many happy, excited celebrations. And here's a bulletin. Supreme Headquarters says that well over 1,000 troop-carrying planes took part in the airborne phase of the invasion, and that the battleship Nevada is in action in the Channel, along with the cruisers Augusta and Tuscaloosa. I am sorry that we weren't able to get Rome and Moscow for you tonight, but that is the news of the world. We'll be back with you at frequent intervals, but now, this is Robert St. John saying goodbye.
The National Broadcasting Company and its affiliated stations will bring you all the news of the invasion as rapidly as it is received. Ever since the first news of the invasion was received shortly after midnight and continuing throughout the early hours of the morning, most of the stations affiliated with the National Broadcasting Company have been bringing you news and commentary on the greatest invasion in the history of warfare. These stations will continue to serve you throughout the night so long as events warrant continuous broadcasting. This is the National Broadcasting Company.
We take you now to Hollywood.
But we bring you Ronald Colman with an exclusive feature in the NBC presentation of the events which are shaping history this day. Now, Mr. Colman.
Especially for this broadcast over NBC, Miss Edna St. Vincent Millay has written A Poem and Prayer for an Invading Army. They must not go alone into that burning building which today is all of Europe. Say that you go with them, spirit and heart and mind. Although the body, grown too old to fight a young man's war, or wounded too deeply under the healed and whitened scars of earlier battles, must remain behind. You, too, may not be with them, save in spirit. You, so greatly needed here in the very van in front of duty, to fashion tools and engines, and to engineer their transports, build the ships and mine the coal, without which all their efforts would be worse than vain. You, men and women, working in the workshops, working on the farms, makers of tools and of engines, fitters of wings to metal birds which have not left the nest, which yet must try their flight, sowers of seed in season, and planters of little plants at intervals, on acres newly plowed and disked and harrowed to feed a starving world. You workers in the shipyards, building ships which crowd each other down the way, you miners of coal in dark and dangerous corridors, who see the sun total eclipse each morning, disappearing, as you do, under the earth's rim, not to emerge into the daylight until the day is over and the lights dim. All you, without whose constant effort and whose skill, without whose loyal and unfailing aid, our men would stand stranded upon a foreign and a hostile shore, without so much as a stout stick to beat away death or pain. Bullets, like angry hornets, buzzing round the ears and the bewildered brain. And from the sky again and yet again the downpour of heavy, evil, accurate, murderous rain. You who have stood behind them through this hour, move strong from behind them now. Let's still the weary bones encase the indefatigable will. But how can men draw near so fierce a conflagration? Even here, across a gray and cold and foggy sea, its heat is felt. Why, touch your cheek. Is it not hot and tight and dry? And look what light climbs up the eastern sky and sinks and climbs again. Like to the bright aurora of the north, it floods and flashes, pulses, pales, then glows, lighting the entire east majestically, as if it were the sun that rose. I wish it were. Surely our fiber and sinew, the backbone and brain of us, are made of some less common stuff than clay. Surely the blood which warms the veins of heroes at the front, our brothers and our sons, runs also in our own. And are we not then capable, perhaps, of something more courageous than we yet have shown? Surely some talisman, some token of our lofty pride in them, our heavy gratitude, and so much love will find its way to them? Some messenger, the vicar and the angels of what we feel, will fly before them where they fly, before them and above, like patron goddesses in wars of old, cleaving with level, lovely brows the hard air before the eager prows, lighting their way with incandescent wings and winged heel. This is the hour. This is the appointed time. The sound of the clock falls awful on our ears, as the sound of the bells, their metal clang and chime, tolling for those about to die. For we know well they will not all come home to lie in summer on the beaches. And yet, weep not, you mothers of young men, their wives, their sweethearts, all who love them well. Fear not the tolling of the solemn bell. It does not prophesy, and it cannot foretell. It only can record. And it records today the passing of a most uncivil age, which had its elegance, but lived too well and far too long, and which on history's page will be found guilty of injustice and grave wrong. O thou Prince of Peace, this is a prayer for war. Yet not a war of man against his fellow man. Say rather, Lord, we do beseech thy guidance and thy help in exorcising from the mind of man, where she has made her nest, a hideous and most fertile beast. And this to bring about with all dispatch, for look, where even now she would lie down again to whelp. Lord God of hosts, thou Lord of hosts not only, not alone of battling armies, Lord and King, but of the childlike heart as well, which longs to put away, oh, not the childish, but the adult, circuitous and adroit, antique and violent thing called war, and sing the beauties of this late to come, but oh, so lovely spring. For see, where our young men go forth in mighty numbers to set free from torture and from every jeopardy things that are dear to thee. Keep in thy loving care, we pray, those of our fighting men whose happy fortune it may be to come back home again after the war is over, and all those who must perforce remain, the mourned, the valiant slain. This we beseech thee, Lord. And now, before we rise from kneeling, one thing more. Soften our hard and angry hearts. Make us ashamed of doing what we do, beneath thy very eyes, knowing it does displease thee. Make us more humble, Lord, for we are proud without sufficient reason. Let our necks be bowed more often to thy will, for well we know what deeds find favor in thy sight, and still we do not do them. O Lord, all through the night, all through the day, keep watch over our brave and dear, so far away. Make us more worthy of their valor and thy love. Let them come home, Oh, let the battle, Lord, be brief, and let our boys come home. So cries the heart, sick for relief from its anxiety, and seeking to forestall a certain and a greater grief. So cries the heart aloud, but the thoughtful mind has something of its own to say. On that day, when they come home from very far away, and further than you think, for each of them has stood upon the very brink, or sat and waited in the anteroom of death, expecting every moment to be called by name. Now, look you to this matter well, that they upon returning shall not find, seated at their own tables, at the head perhaps of the long festive board, trinked out in prodigal array, the very monster which they sallied forth to conquer and to quell, and left behind for dead. Let us forget such words and all they mean as hatred, bitterness, rancor, greed, intolerance, bigotry. Let us renew our faith and pledge to man his right to be himself and free. Say that the victory is ours. Then say, and each must search his heart in true humility, Lord, Father, who are we that we should wield so great a weapon for the right and rehabilitation of thy creature, man? Lo, from all corners of the earth we ask all great and noble to come forth, converge upon this errand, in this task, with generous and gigantic plans. Hold high this torch who will, lift up this sword who can.
You have heard Ronald Coleman in a poem and prayer for an invading army, written especially for this broadcast by Miss Edna St. Vincent Millay. This first reading of the poem was an exclusive feature in the NBC presentation of the world-shaking events of the day. is the National Broadcasting Company.
The greatest army in history is battering at Fortress Europe. In addition to special news broadcasts, NBC will bring you the latest bulletins as soon as received. Stay tuned to WEAF New York. Having canceled all regularly scheduled programs, NBC invites you to listen tonight at 8 o'clock over most of these stations to Ginny Sims in a program especially arranged for this Invasion Day. Keep tuned all night to NBC for the latest bulletins as they come from the fighting fronts. As part of its invasion coverage, the National Broadcasting Company presents H.V. Caldenborn with the news and his own analysis of today's momentous events. Mr. Caldenborn hopes in the course of tonight's program to call in London to interview Brigadier General Smythe, military correspondent of the Kensley newspaper chain. And now here is Mr. Caldenborn.
Good evening, everybody. Unfortunately, we have just been advised from London that our two-way conversation with General Smythe cannot be set up for tonight. However, we hope to bring it to you tomorrow night and perhaps on other nights of the week when there will be something important to report from London. Supreme Allied Headquarters issued the first report on invasion progress shortly after 6 o'clock tonight. The official Allied communique says Allied forces succeeded in their initial landings. Fighting continues. This means, so far, invasion is successful. Our first objectives were achieved. Losses were low. Allied assault forces met little opposition in the Channel or in the air. German coast defenses were weaker than we expected. The British Air Ministry reveals tonight that since May 7th, our planes have hammered huge German naval guns embedded in concrete casemates. Those that stored up on the invasion coast, they have not proved effective. There are indications that tactical surprise has been attained by us at many points. Our control of the sea and of the air gave us speedy control of important points on the French Normandy coast. Intensive air bombardment had eliminated much German coastal artillery. Well over 1,000 troop-carrying aircraft, including gliders, participated in the airborne phase of the invasion. A record use of that kind of air material. More than 4,000 ships and 11,000 first-line planes participated in today's operations. 2 more records. Among the ships that bombarded the French coast were the United States cruisers Augusta and Tuscaloosa and the battleship Nevada. The President told us that up to noon we had lost only 2 destroyers and 1 small landing ship tank. General Eisenhower says the naval casualties were very light, especially considering the many ships involved. Air losses totaled 1%, a low figure. The 8th Air Force announces the loss today of only 4 bombers and 7 fighters after hitting more than 100 coastal defense targets. It is significant that Air Marshal Goering said today invasion must be defeated even if it means the death of the Luftwaffe. Tonight, it looks as though that is just what it does mean. President Roosevelt said Channel weather was the factor which determined the invasion date. D-Day was set for late May or early June. Bad weather finally delayed invasion 24 hours more. Our first major objective appears to be the Normandy Peninsula. Cherbourg is at the tip of that peninsula, and the historic river port of Caen is its most important railroad center. Our troops have reached Caen, 10 miles inland, and are fighting for the town. On the flat north coast of Normandy, we have control of a beachhead 16 miles long and several miles deep. Bulldozers are already preparing an airstrip near the beach. So far, we have achieved some surprise and much progress. We are pouring in reinforcements. Large numbers of tanks were landed with our troops. Tank battles have developed. Tomorrow, or the day after, the crucial test of our invasion will begin. The Germans will then strike their heavy blows against our beachheads. The barometer is falling tonight in the Dover Straits area. This means unsettled weather, which will make our additional landings a little more difficult. If we can hold our established bases against these first counter blows, we can expand them soon thereafter. Our headquarters expects the first heavy counterattacks to be launched within 48 hours. Our reconnaissance tells us that it is coming. German and Allied reports both indicate that we have now established three main beachheads. One, at the mouth of the Orne River. This is on the east coast of the Normandy Peninsula, 25 miles east of Le Havre. The Allies have driven into the stone-housed streets of Caen, where William the Conqueror, in 1066, assembled the fleet with which he invaded England. This part of the Normandy coast is flat. It is ideal for airborne landings. Two, on the east side of the Normandy Peninsula, at the mouth of the Vire River. This second beachhead is 40 miles northwest of Caen. Caen, by the way, is spelled C-A-E-N. It is near Isigny on your map, spelled I-S-I-G-N-Y. 3. On the east side of the Normandy Peninsula, where the Allied troops, according to the Germans, straddled the Cherbourg, Carentan, Valognes road. This landing is just back of Cherbourg. It has already been reinforced and is intended to give us control of the great port of Cherbourg. Familiar to us all as transatlantic travelers. Tonight, a huge Allied naval squadron is cruising off Cherbourg. It is possible that General de Gaulle is on one of these ships ready to land on his native soil. There were other landings near Havre and the Seine estuary, and possibly between Havre and Dunkirk. These, however, may have been mere commando raids to deceive the Germans. There is also a Berlin report that we have invaded the Channel Islands of Guernsey and Jersey off the Normandy coast. This sounds plausible as part of the Normandy operation. We must not be boastful, but at the end of this first invasion day, I cannot help asking these questions. Where is Hitler's Atlantic wall that was to prevent invasion? Where is the hoarded Luftwaffe that was to defeat invasion? Where are the secret weapons that were to be the undoing of invasion? Where is the counter-invasion that was to surprise the British? Perhaps we can find the answer to all these questions in the simple phrase used by General Eisenhower as dawn broke this morning. He smiled and said, "The sun has come out. Today, it is the sun of victory."
Oh, Mr. Kaltenborn, we've established contact with Brigadier General Smythe, and he's waiting to talk to you now from London. If you'll just use these earphones, you'll hear his voice.
Righto. General Smythe, can you hear me? Hello, General Smythe in London. I'm going to put to you some questions which you, as the military correspondent of the Kensley newspaper chain in Britain, will probably be able to answer. Question 1. Why have we landed on the Normandy coast 80 miles from Britain instead of across the Straits of Dover, only 20 miles from Britain? If you'll be patient, I think the General has heard us. As you know, we've been having a little trouble all day in getting directly through. But frequently, we do get through after a few moments' delay. We're calling General Smythe in London, putting questions to him concerning the invasion. Just before the broadcast began, we were told we couldn't get through. Then, shortly after I went on the air, we were told that we could get through. Now, we've tried, and it seems that we cannot get through. Well, we'll try it again tomorrow night. In any case, you'll be interested in the questions that I wanted to ask this British general. And the first question is, why have we landed on the Normandy coast, 80 miles from Britain, instead of across the Straits of Dover, only 20 miles from Britain? My guess is that he would answer that the Germans had expected us across the Dover Straits, had made their strongest defense preparations in that area, had not expected us to land on the coast of Normandy, therefore were not as well prepared for us there as they were opposite Dover. My second question, what do you consider the outstanding achievement so far registered by our invasion forces? Well, if I were General Smythe, which I am not, I would probably say that the outstanding achievement is to make the landings successfully with very low losses, to have succeeded in placing troops on 3 points of Normandy at a negligible loss in naval vessels, at only a 1% loss in aircraft. In other words, what was the hardest phase of the invasion is accomplished on the first day with relatively minor losses. And my third question, is this our greatest single effort, or are we still capable of making landings in equal force at other points on the invasion coasts of Europe? And I should answer my own question by saying the number of troops that we have landed so far is negligible compared to the number that we have available, and we will be able to make other invasion efforts at other points. For the first time since the war began, the Allies are waiting for the creation of a second front by Russia, probably within 24 to 48 hours, and almost certainly before the end of the week. Soviet armies are expected to throw their demonstrated vast power into a new offensive, synchronized with the Anglo-American invasion of Western Europe. Joint Allied operations, driving against Germany from both east and west, was worked out at the Tehran Conference. The plan is to knock Germany out of the war this year by a many-sided offensive. Soviet artillery on the lower Dniester front is already stepping up the tempo of its barrage. Huge Soviet forces have completed regrouping operations in that area and are believed ready to strike. Russia today has close to 300 divisions and 5 million front-line fighters ready to strike a decisive blow against the common enemy. Thousands of planes and tanks and Cossack cavalrymen are standing alert along the vast Russian front. 7 weeks of preparation for the new offensive finds the Red Army ready. Today witnessed the first American bomber raid from our new bases in Soviet Russia. They showered tons of explosives on Galatz, Romania, and then returned to their Russian bases. They are ready to play their part in Russia's forthcoming offensive. The Germans expect a Russian blow on their southern flank. That explains the recent German counterattacks on the Jassy area of Romania, which have made little progress. And here are 2 bulletins from other fronts. The United Nations radio at Algiers says that Allied armored forces were already at a point about 9 miles beyond the Tiber River, and that the Germans were falling back in some disorder to the north and west of Rome. Let us not forget the tremendous importance of the Italian front, our great victory in the conquest of Rome, and now our successful pursuit of the defeated German armies. And MacArthur's headquarters, down in the southwest Pacific, says that American invasion troops on Biak Island, off New Guinea, have now battled to within 1.5 miles of Makmur airfield, so that there, too, we are about to achieve an important victory in securing control of this airfield within only 900 miles of the Philippine Islands. And on this day, as we look over the war effort of the United Nations, climaxed by the great invasion that was so well launched, we cannot help but feel thankful that fate has given us this opportunity to play this great role in this world drama. And every church in New York City, and I am told in almost every city in the land, today has been filled with devout worshippers who pray to God that our troops may safely accomplish their great mission. Rarely have the churches of this country held a throng so devout, so reverent, so eager to supplicate God for his merciful intervention in this great struggle of all time. And at 10 o'clock tonight, the President of the United States will voice that same prayer that is in the hearts of all our people. Good night.
Good night, Mr. Kaltenborn. As part of its invasion coverage, the National Broadcasting Company has presented H.V. Kaltenborn, Dean of American News Commentators, with the news and his own analysis of today's momentous events. This is the National Broadcasting Company. NBC is standing by to bring you the complete news coverage of the invasion. WEAF news broadcasts will continue through the night, and invasion bulletins broadcast as received. WEAF, New York.
We shall pause now while Dr. Israel Goldstein, president of the Synagogue Council of America, leads in prayer. Dr. Goldstein.
Lord of hosts, girded for battle against the blasphemers of thy name, a mighty host of free men are resolved to crush oppression. Today, as our sons and the sons of our allies enter upon the final act in the drama of liberation, our prayers go with them. Anxiety mingled with pride fills our hearts. We know the cost may be heavy, but we shrink not, for the future of our children's children is at stake. Arise, O Lord, and let thine enemies be scattered. Then speed the dawn of peace, O Father of mercy. May the reign of evil go up as the smoke, and thou alone rule supreme over a family of nations dwelling in security and in concord, with none to make them afraid. Amen.
Thank you, Dr. Goldstein. We take you now to Hollywood.
Continuing with NBC's coverage of D-Day, the following program will be interrupted without delay in the event there is any late invasion news. Ladies and gentlemen, Miss Ginny Sims.
Mothers and fathers of America, I know what is in your hearts tonight. Night is falling on the greatest day in the history of all free people, D-Day, Tuesday, June 6, 1944. At dawn this morning, the Supreme Commander of our Allied invasion forces uttered two words that put an end to months of torturous waiting, months of not knowing. Those two fateful words were, "Let's go." And with those two all-important words went millions of mighty cheers, many unknown fears, and many unshed tears. But your sons, your loved ones, didn't wait to wonder or be afraid. They sailed this morning to free the world forever of oppression. They'd waited long enough for D-Day. And now they're firmly moving forward to another day, V-Day, the day of victory. With our strongest prayers and our deepest faith in the eternal freedom that will soon rule the world, we must stand behind those men who marched this morning. As this most fateful day in history draws to a close, we must look forward to that V-Day when our loved ones will come home to stay. In each prayer, let us ask God to speed the day that they'll return to the land they love. And we all must have faith, and our prayers will be answered. Tonight, as a cloak of darkness falls over our brave fighting men, we wonder what they're thinking. We know they're tired. We know they've done a great job today, and are going to carry on that job through the night and through the days to come. We wonder if they're thinking of us, or as we're thinking of them. Are they perhaps dreaming of the things they're fighting for? The hometown, the baseball park on Saturday afternoon, the girl they left behind. We know they're dreaming of the day when they can come back to the things they love. And tonight, we know that they'd like us to sing songs that tell of those things. I know they'd want us to keep singing, for that's one of the things they're fighting for. So, let's sing a song about V-Day. There's gonna be a hallelujah day when the boys have all come home to stay, and a million bands begin to play. We'll be dancing the victory polka, and when we've lit the torch of liberty in each blacked out land across the sea, when a man can proudly say, "I'm free," we'll be dancing the victory polka, and we will give a mighty cheer.
when the ration book is just a souvenir.
And we'll heave a mighty sigh
when each gal can kiss the boy she kissed goodbye. And they'll come marching down Fifth Avenue, the United Nations in review. When this lovely dream has all come true, we'll be dancing the victory polka.
Dance, dance, dance the victory polka.
Join, join, join the merry throng.
Sing, sing, sing the victory polka.
Raise your voices loud and strong,
and they'll come marching down Fifth Avenue, the United Nations in review.
When this lovely dream has all come true, we'll be dancing the victory polka. Usually on Tuesday nights, we present the greatest guest stars in the world in a show designed to bring our fighting men closer to their loved ones back home. Well, this Tuesday night on D-Day, the greatest guest stars in the world are in mortal combat on the coast of France. They're putting on a show that can never be surpassed. They have an audience as big as the world, an audience that is cheering them on to the final curtain, the curtain that will signify the end of Nazi tyranny, the end of bloodshed and terror. But one of the great guest stars we'd planned to present tonight has a message that we feel should be sent. And if our program here tonight can bring loved ones closer together in this hour of grim expectancy, then we'll be that much happier. We'd like you to meet a wounded American soldier that I met at the Attorney General Hospital this week who has something to say about the invasion. His name is Corporal Joe Samatoik of the United States Army. Joe, I'm sorry things didn't work out as we planned tonight.
Well, Jenny, what we'd planned to say isn't half as important as what's being said right now by those men going into France.
Well, that's right.
But I do want to say this, and I think I'm speaking for all the boys down at the hospital when I say that we're darn sorry we missed the big show. We'd like to be over there with them right now, but I'm afraid that I just can't make it on these crutches. So about all I can say is, they're yours, fellas. Go get them.
Well, Joe, tonight of all nights, we wish that Johnny could complete a phone call I know you'd like to make. You're in a tough spot, on crutches and 6,000 miles away from your wife, who is an Army nurse somewhere in the British Isles doing her part in the invasion today. And I know that to call her right now would mean an awful lot to both of you. I know if you were there beside her, you'd have lots to say to her. We can't make the call, as you know, but by some crook of fate, she might hear your voice calling across that great ocean that separates you tonight. What would you like to say to your wife, Joe?
Well, just that. Well, Nancy, I love you lots. I wish I could be there with you tonight, and I know you're awfully busy working with the wounded boys. Well, I just wish I could help, too. It's awful being so helpless and so very far away. But be brave, sweeter, and I love you very much. I'll be seeing you.
Well, Joe, I hope your wife heard that message, because perhaps she'll hear your voice through the great din of battle and know that you, like millions of other Americans tonight, are praying for the safety and victory of our loved ones overseas. Come back next week, Joe, and we'll tell the story we plan to tell tonight, okay?
Gee, that's great, Jenny. Thanks very much.
Well, you're very welcome, Joe, and thank you. The world we love will live again. The faith we have, the hope renewed. Remove the thorn that's born of strife that brought the gloom again, so that the rose of truth and youth can live and bloom again. Another day is due again. A sky of gray Yes, it'll live again when peace is found. And there's time for books and looks around at a country scene, a tree serene that stands above a meadow green. And in that tree, you'll see a nest where the dove of peace has come to rest.
And though the song above is slumbering within the hearts of men,
The world we love will live Tonight, throughout America, many fathers and mothers are wondering if their boy is lying on some beachhead, alone on some battlefield, wounded, perhaps dying. We've been told that the battle will be long and hard. The casualties will be heavy. Many of your loved ones will sacrifice their lives in this great march to victory, and we thought perhaps it would help you to know what your country and the combined strength of all the United Nations has done to ease the suffering and pain of our fighting men. We're honored to have a great man as our guest tonight who has worked in the battlefield with the wounded men. And he was awarded the Navy Cross for rescuing 9 men who were left to die during the Jap invasion of Java. This man who knows about medical care and what we're doing for our wounded fighting men is the famous and heroic Dr. Wassell. We'd like for you to meet him now. Ladies and gentlemen, we're proud to present Commander Cordon Wassell of the United States Navy. Commander Wassell, what can you tell the mothers and fathers and families about the preparations that have been made for the care of our wounded in this invasion?
The Army and the Navy, the Marines and the Seabees, with the Air Corps, have the best doctors and surgeons that America can produce. These men are leaders in the medical world. Such units come from Johns Hopkins, Mayo's, Massachusetts General, Washington Medical College at St. Louis, and many others, too numerous to name. Then we also have in this Corps your own hometown doctors. We have assisting them in the Navy, the medical corpsmen. In the Army, the medical orderlies. These men have been trained not only in medical care, but in the evacuation of wounded to a center that is staffed by the best physicians and surgeons in the world.
Well, what about medical supplies, Dr. Wassell?
During my evacuation of the wounded of the Marblehead in Houston, there was never a time that I did not have sufficient medical supplies and assistance to care for these wounded that I had charge of. And that was early in the war. Today, our medical supplies are 10 times as complete. Every drug, medicine, and instrument known to the medical science is at the disposal of the Allied invasion force. There's one point I would like to make especially at this time.
Well, what's that, Dr. Wassell?
It's blood plasma. Take 10 men on the battlefield. The orderly or corpsman hasn't the knowledge that the doctor has, and he perhaps rightfully gives blood to those that do not especially need it. You might call that a waste, but it is not. To combat shock, the blood has to be given before shock sets in. And the orderly and corpsman rightfully give it to all of them. Out of 10, perhaps 4 or 5 did not specially need it. But an ounce of prevention there is worth a pound of cure. So we need large supplies to back up our men. Make your date today and give your blood. I've given mine since I've been back.
Dr. Wassell, how rapidly are wounded men being treated in this invasion? Will you tell us about it?
Even in the dispatches today, I noted that wounded men are being transported back to England, where I know they're getting the best care that can be given. They do not wait 4 or 5 days now, but get the men into a base hospital within the 24 hours.
That's why our casualties will be lower than in previous wars.
You mean they work right on the field, too, don't they?
Yes, our doctors on the field with the corpsmen and medical orderlies administer first aid, which cares for shock, pain, and protection of wounds. These people are immediately sent to a base hospital. In the invasion armada are swarms of medical ships, large and small, carrying supplies to the front and bringing the wounded back immediately to safety. They're equipped to take care of the wounded right there, complete with doctors, surgery, and nurses. The smaller invasion boats that take supplies and men over immediately return with the wounded. No time is lost in taking care of the wounded.
Dr. Wassel, such news from a man like you should assure mothers and fathers and families in America tonight that their sons are being well taken care of on the field of battle.
The battle has just begun. The hardest fighting is yet to come. Many men will be injured, but to all listening in, please remember that our fighting men have the best of everything in the way of medical care. I know because I have not only worked with wounded men in the battlefield, but I have received that care myself, so don't worry. Your son is out there fighting with his life, but he won't have to fight for it. Good night.
Well, thank you, Commander Cordon Wassel. We're very honored and proud to have you with us tonight. Thank you very, very much. Tonight, our fighting men overseas would want us to carry on in the same spirit in which they left. In all their letters back home, they always say, "Don't worry about me, I'm okay. It's you folks back home that we worry about." Well, let's show them that we haven't lost that spirit. In our hearts, we have a song that keeps rising above our fears and gives promise of a bright and happy future.
Don't you be weary. Don't you be dreary. 'Cause that trumpet's gonna sound. Just keep your eyes peeled and keep your lips sealed. And when that good news gets around, there'll be a jubilee. There'll be a jubilee. There'll be a jubilee upon that happy day. Sister, you're man, my man too. You're man and my man too. Your man and my man too will be coming home to stay. Great day in the morning when that peaceful sun will be dawning. Oh, say, what a gay time, why the night will seem just like daytime. Sisters, there'll be jubilee, happiness for you and me. There'll be a jubilee upon that happy day. There'll be a great day. What a great day. There'll be a jubilee.
another song of our dreams of the future, a dream of tomorrow that will soon be here, a day of freedom and peace, and a day when we will no longer wait and pray for our loved ones' return, a dream that will come true. In my dream of tomorrow, there's a bright, sunny day. I see Tom, Bill, and Johnny marching home now to stay. There are angels singing a hymn of joy. Church bells ringing as girl meets boy. In my dream of tomorrow, you are so close to me. In a home full of laughter, in a world that is free. So my darling Chinna will see. Till my dream of tomorrow comes Tonight, our thoughts are with those who are fighting for our way of living. In each of our hearts, there's a prayer for their safety and speedy victory. We have with us a man who has given spiritual guidance to men who have invaded other coasts in this war. He was at Pearl Harbor on December the 7th. He has seen men go into battle, and he was there beside them to offer words of comfort and courage. Tonight, he has a message of faith and hope on this first day of the Allied invasion of Europe. Ladies and gentlemen, may I present Chaplain Walter Peck of the United States Navy.
It is fitting and proper that in the midst of the confusion and excitement of D-Day, we pause to consider not only the military significance of the day, but the spiritual significance. We all want to win, and we all want safety for our men, the men of America, and the daughters of America. We speak of prayers for D-Day. I'd like to suggest to you prayers for every day. For this fight shall last many days, and men shall pour out their lives on bloody fields and aboard ships, that Old Glory may wave, and a decent and proper chance for life be everyone's. The efficacy of any prayer is the sincerity with which we offer it, and our own worthiness and faith, which will evaluate every utterance we make. America is fighting for her life, and she stands to lose her own soul. It is up to us that they who shall pass shall not have died in vain. Now, with those thoughts, may we all of us bow in prayer. God of our fathers, known of old, Lord of our far-flung battle line, we pray for victory. Not simply a victory of arms, but a victory which is thine, a victory of righteousness. We pray for the security of our sons and daughters. We acknowledge thy sovereignty, that all we do with thee. Keep the people of America that they may give of themselves as their sons are giving at this very moment. May the mantle of thy Spirit be on our men. Thy blessing on those who must die. thy courage in the heart for all here and for all there. Into thy hands we commit our men and our nation. Amen.
Fight thy battle on earth. As we walk through the perilous darkness, lend us thy holy light that shines in thy heavenly mansion to guide our path in the night. And when thy shield and thine armor to the gallant boys over there, they are thy children, Father, and this is thy country's prayer, that soon may the forces of evil fall at last on their knees, with the flag of thy kingdom of heaven flying high in the breeze. Then sons will return to their mothers, men to their wives, and then this earth will be like heaven, peaceful and bright.
This is the National Broadcasting Company.
The day of reckoning is here, the most crucial time in the history of the world. NBC will interrupt any and all programs to bring you the latest invasion bulletins. Stay tuned to WEAF New York.
30 minutes of music in keeping with D-Day, played by Roy Shield and the orchestra. The program will be interrupted from time to time to bring you the latest news bulletins as they are received in the newsroom. So keep tuned to NBC to keep in step with the latest developments on the invasion front on this Invasion Day. Roy Shield and the orchestra set the tempo of our half hour with a spirited march from the pen of George Gershwin. Strike Up the Band. Typically American melody, one that has been handed down from generation to generation, one that is closely associated with America and the freedom for which we stand. Roy Shield and the orchestra play a special arrangement of Yankee Doodle.
Nazi-controlled Paris radio said at 8 p.m. Eastern War Time that an important American-British naval squadron was cruising off Cherbourg. This bulletin came to you from the NBC newsroom in New York. Stay tuned to your NBC station for further news.
A musical tribute to a gallant ally. Roy Shield and the orchestra salute the Russian cavalry with their song, Meadowlands. marching feet have followed the tempo set by a military band playing the next selection. Familiar to most of you, and always welcome on any program of martial music, it's the National Emblem March. Typically British melody, as Roy Shield and the orchestra turn to the musical score of Eric Coates' London Suite. The Knightsbridge March.
march that is truly American from the first word of its title to the last note of its orchestral arrangement. The American Patrol. A march dear to the hearts of every citizen of the nation in which the first D-Day invasion landings were made. Roy Shield and the orchestra play the French march, Le Régiment du Sambre et Meuse. A change of tempo now as Roy Shield and the orchestra turn to an old Irish air in special arrangement. The orchestra plays The Minstrel Boy. Our program comes to a close as Roy Shield and the orchestra select a melody from the prolific pen of one of America's most gifted contemporary composers. From the music written for My Maryland, It's your land and my land. From NBC's Chicago studios, the National Broadcasting Company has presented 30 minutes of music in keeping with D-Day, played by Roy Shield and the orchestra. Keep tuned to NBC for latest developments on the invasion front on this Invasion Day.
The National Broadcasting Company.
Congressman Everett Dirksen, scheduled to speak at this time, will not be heard tonight. We hope to be able to bring Congressman Dirksen to you at a later date. WEAF, New York.